Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in our live webinar this morning. So what we've put together for you is a pretty punchy topic that often we actually get talked about a lot, which is around the topic of the use of spreadsheets in organisations and when to look at when automation can be employed. Just to introduce myself and my esteemed colleague, Michael Mackey. Michael Mackey is our Chief Technology Officer across our corporate performance and data management business, and myself, I'm responsible for leadership of that business here at Fusion 5. So today we're going to talk through, firstly, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of my line of business. Then we're going to talk about really probably what we would see as the 5 main challenges that we see that spreadsheets present in organisations as well. Firstly, certainly to say that we're not coming across in any way that we're anti-spreadsheets or anything like that. Spreadsheets are a fantastic productivity tool to be used in organisations. What we're going to talk about is just some approaches so that you can evaluate the use of whether you would invest in utilising a spreadsheet, or you would look at some of the alternatives, which brings me to my third point as well. Then we're going to give you some tools in the form of an evaluation framework, which will enable you to assess of whether you would continue to use for your particular use case a spreadsheet, or again look at perhaps some of the alternatives that we've mentioned a little bit earlier on. Later on into our session, what we were really focused on doing here is again just to actually give you some actionable insights around how you want to take this forward as well. So if you have identified that obviously if you were to use a spreadsheet or you weren't to use a spreadsheet, what steps that we would recommend that you take to move to a more automated approach. And we've highlighted that that can be achieved in a really short horizon in terms of across a couple of quarters. And then towards the end of the session, we will be able to take your questions as well. Thank you. So a little bit here, just in terms of my part of the business as well. So we've got 4 main areas of our go-to-market, and we like to talk about it in terms of helping organisations manage the life cycle of their digital assets. So we start from the left in terms of data management, which is really helping you source and obtain, employ policy, etc., around your source data assets, which obviously once you turn data into insights, then you're able to move into the use of analytics inside of your organisation. Now today we're going to touch on some of the planning concepts as well. We're really focused as an organisation of helping our clients move into a collaborative, connected planning environment as well. So we'll show you again how you can actually move into that type of environment. And then the 4th area of our organisation is we're focused around automation and compliance. So that may be process automation, period end reconciliation, transactional matching. But it also could be static-based report packs. So for instance, like your annual board papers, management packs, etc. We have some really unique solutions that we've helped organisations to be able to, again, integrate source data, employ some workflow, good governance practices, so that you can get a lot of benefits and just really take a lot of the manual effort that often is employed by developing these artifacts manually as well. So with that, I will pass across. So let's look at an example where Michael will look at how the use of spreadsheets are used in a planning environment. So with this, I'll pass across to Michael Mackey, our Chief Technology Officer. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so the example I'm going to take today is really just around planning, doing budgeting and forecasting in your organisation. And if you, it's probably likely that you have a process in place that looks something like this, particularly if you're using Excel, as part of that process. You'll start with the previous budget template or the forecast template, the one that you used last time. Someone will go through, make some changes to it. They'll update some assumptions, maybe load in base data. You might have actual data that you want to use in the forecasting process, so you'll bring that in as well. You might have driver data and different data sets too. Typically would see, lots of copying and pasting, for lack of a better term, Basically, if you want to get other users in the organization to contribute to these plans, you'd typically go through and you'd build out the plan for each business unit or each region, and populate the underlying data there as well. So they may mean more tabs or more workbooks that you want to send out to the users. And then the results will come in, they get consolidated, they get reviewed. You might have someone who looks after this process. They'll get reported through to management. They might go through different layers of approvals as well. And then if you need to make any changes, then you kind of start with the cycle again. You may go through the whole process where you send out the templates again, or make some high-level adjustments too. So this is a relatively simple process, but as you can see, it's there's a lot of steps. So there is a potential for things to go wrong in this process. And if we look at what can go wrong, I quite like this comic strip because it really sums it up for me. This is a Dilbert comic strip where his boss is saying to him, "Did you see any errors on the spreadsheet I put together?" And he said, "Only 3." And then, what are the threats? Your data, your format, and your formulas. And that kind of sums up the different categories of errors, if you like, that can occur when you're working with spreadsheets. And if we look at the first one, your data, particularly if you've got a lot of people contributing to the spreadsheet, there's the risk that certain bits of data may get overwritten that aren't supposed to. If people are copying and pasting data into the spreadsheet as well, we sometimes find that it's very difficult to line it up correctly, particularly if you're working with a long spreadsheet and you can misalign values. So, essentially put it in the wrong place. And if you're linking Excel to another data source, you may be feeding it with GL or ERP information, personal information, and so forth. There's of course the risk that you may run into some issues there if things aren't refreshed correctly. So data issues are something that needs to be managed well, and you have to have quite good processes around managing the data in Excel. In terms of formatting, I've seen some pretty beautiful Excel models, and they can look very good. You can obviously extend it with macros and things like that as well. And you can lock it down to a degree, but you've always got the risk that users may add in columns, they may add in rows, and they basically might put the spreadsheet out of alignment. So that's something that happens from a formatting perspective. And then the final one is just around formulas. Some people are very, very proud of their spreadsheets, and they'd spend a lot of time getting it perfect. And I've done this myself, where you think everything's great, and then you realize that you haven't dragged a range, a sum formula down far enough, so you're not summing the right information, and you're missing out valuable information in your plan. So, the formulas is definitely an area which can go wrong. And again, if people have changed the format, they've deleted rows, they've deleted comments, you can also get reference errors and things like that as well. So they're really the types of errors that you can add that we see, when you're using Excel for planning, budgeting, and reporting. Of course, if the spreadsheet is complex, and when I say complex, I mean if it's linked to other data sources, if you've got complex formulas in there, if there's a really big data set in behind it, obviously the risk of errors really does increase. And the amount of hands which is effectively touching the spreadsheet as well factors into it too. So the degree of manual intervention is important too, because obviously, as humans, we're not perfect, and it's very easy to introduce errors, when lots of people are in there modifying the spreadsheets and so forth. And then what about the other challenges? Version controls is something that we quite often, it's quite difficult to do in Excel. Of course, you can take a copy of your file, but if you've got it linked to other spreadsheets, you have to go through and do a lot of work validating that the links are correct. Very difficult to make comparisons with different iterations of the plans that you're doing as well. Because they are quite often in separate files, so you have to go through a consolidation exercise. Security is something that's getting a lot better in Excel. You can share a document with a certain group of users, but it's very difficult to lock down certain rows where you don't want users to be able to enter information, or maybe you want some users to be able to enter their information around their business unit or their region, but you want to lock others out. Very, very difficult to control that process and make sure everything's secure. The other aspect is a lot of people send spreadsheets around to other users. And if you're sending spreadsheets, there's obviously the risk that it can fall into the wrong hands if you're sending them over email, and you may have sensitive details in there, such as personnel data and things like that too. So you need to manage those two factors. The other area which is a little bit challenging in Excel is just the user experience around entering data. Obviously, a spreadsheet by definition is a two-dimensional view of the world. You have rows and you have columns, and you're entering data in cells which relate to those. But what if you want to enter sales data, for example, and you want to enter the data by region, you wanted to enter it by product, by customer, by account, and different pieces of information. Obviously, your spreadsheet's going to get very, very big, and there's a lot of repetition involved with enabling your spreadsheet to collect all of that information. It's not a database, it's really just a two-dimensional view of the world that you can link through to other spreadsheets. Auditability is another one. You don't have the capability to link through to your ERP solution or some of the other solutions that you're integrating with directly in Excel. There may be a way to sort of feed through data somehow, but to actually trace the data back to the source is quite difficult. The other aspect of that is, as you've got users and they're making changes, there's no audit log, so it doesn't tell you that someone went into the system at a certain point in time and made a change to a particular value. So yeah, it can get quite difficult to trace, and you might think a spreadsheet's locked down. That's you've got that filed away somewhere, but someone might open it up and accidentally make changes to it instead of another version, and then obviously you're going to have issues because of that, because it's not a historical record of the data. And then I don't know if anyone's had this happen in Excel. I've had it happen a few times where the Excel file has essentially crashed because you've run out of capacity. So scalability is something else that needs to be managed. The calculations can get quite slow if you're doing complex modeling, and there you can hit the limitations in terms of rows and columns as well. And yeah, you can experience stability issues too. So these are the types of challenges that we sometimes see in Excel. So I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes going through what some of the alternative approaches are to give you a feel for, if you weren't using Excel for these planning, budgeting, forecasting, reporting processes, what would a more automated solution look like? And I've just got 3 scenarios that I'm going to walk through. So the first scenario is all around cutting costs. So head office wants you to cut costs above the board, across the board by 5%. So you've already gone through an exercise and you've, everyone's done their forecast, but now they've said, no, we need some more cuts. So if you were using a planning and analytics solution, the information will present itself graphically in a dashboard, both tabular form and graphical. And you'll be able to actually go into a screen here, like I've gone into my performance dashboard, and I can see my metrics at the top. I can run this dashboard for any of the regions that I've got here along the top. I've got the P&L essentially down here, and then some visuals on the screen as well. What I can do directly from this dashboard is actually enter some data. So I can say, okay, my costs are 10.3 million. I can type directly in that cell, I want to decrease that by 5%. And then what happens then is that number's essentially broken back across all of those regions, or those different entities that we've got across the top, across the different accounts and so forth. So what these planning platforms enable you to do is enter data at quite a high level, and based on different modeling and assumptions, and actually push those numbers down. So yeah, it really does sort of streamline the process of making those sort of changes. Obviously, the alternative in an Excel-based model would be either to make a high-level adjustment, but then the next time you're doing your next forecasting or planning round, those numbers won't be reflected against the individual areas of the business, or otherwise go through and update multiple spreadsheets or tabs to get to that number as well, which can be quite tricky. And because we're only human, there's also a risk of errors as well. The next scenario I wanted to run through is around comparing variances. So if you're working with a reporting platform or planning and analytics platform, you've got the ability to essentially build reports. And when we talk about reports, they're templates. So they're not just a static report that relates to one area of the business. They can be run for each of the departments that you have in the business. This example here, I can run this by cost center. I can look at the whole of Fusion 5, the different levels in the organization, or right down to the cost center level. I could run it by a project, so I could get the project view of the world as well, get a project P&L. So I can change those selectors and instantly see the result. I've also got the ability to change information directly in the report too. So here I'm looking at my variance between working budget and actual. If I did want to, maybe I want to compare that back to my March budget update or my prior year budget, I've got the ability to select any of these saved, snapshots of my plan that I like. And this is where the version control comes in as well, because I'm working within a platform and I can take different snapshots as I go through my the different budgeting, forecasting, planning rounds. I can also go through and use those snapshots in my variance analysis, and I only need to run my report and just make a change here. I don't have to pull together any reports or anything like that. It's really as simple as that. The final example I wanted to show is I just mocked this up. So this is basically an example of a company that's building products in New Zealand, and then as you can see by the graph, they're really just exporting them to Australia. So 100% of it's essentially going to Australia at the moment. And I just wanted to sort of demonstrate how you can centralize your different business assumptions. So I've just started off with a simple one. Here we've got the exchange rate that we're using for planning purposes. Anyone who follows the exchange rates will know that they've been fluctuating quite a bit over the last 3 months, probably because of COVID and some of the other things which are happening in the world. But what I can do is I can come in here and I can change my exchange rate for my forecast period. So in this example, I've got actuals up to here. They've just flown through to my system. Obviously, this assumes that we're in October now, but obviously it'll be wherever you're up to at the point in time. And I can come in and I can say, well, I want to, the exchange rate is changing, so I can change that to 0.87 instead of 0.90, and I can push that data out along all of the other periods as well. And you can see after doing that, you can see visually that my numbers have changed. So here, if I go back to this example here, I've got my what I call my official forecast. So this is my last forecast, and then I've got the one that I'm actually changing at the moment. So when I apply that rate change, I can see that it's created a variance between the two. Because I'm exporting to Australia, I can see that I've got my revenues increased by 2.7%, and that's resulted in a 60% increase in net profit. So just being able to change those central assumptions and see instantly what those, what impact that may have on your bottom line. Obviously, you can hook this up to your cash flow as well. Is really, really powerful. And I can see things like seasonality in my charts as well. So they're just some scenarios around around alternative approaches to actually managing this data in Excel. Now what I'm going to do is run through an evaluation framework, which talks about some characteristics around whether it makes sense to automate certain Excel or certain spreadsheets or not. So it's a very simple framework. Here we're just looking at two different things. We're looking at business value. So how much value do you get out of the specific spreadsheet that you have in your organization? And we're looking at how repeatable it is. So am I just using this spreadsheet for a one-off activity, or do I rely on it every month to support my decisions? And really all we have to do is plot, the different spreadsheets that we have in our organization on these axes to determine whether they're good candidates for automation or not. So, and what you'll find if you go through this exercise is, obviously things that have a high degree of business value and are highly repeatable are the ideal candidates for automation. And particularly if they are complex, if there is a risk of some of those errors that I pointed out previously, or if there is a lot of hands touching the spreadsheet, there's a lot of manual intervention coming into it, they're really the ideal candidates. If you find that you have spreadsheets in this region, they're typically better handled directly in MS Excel. So one-off activities, things that are very fluid, the way you look at things changes all the time, but well in that category. Over at the top, so spreadsheets which aren't so repeatable, but they have a high degree of business value. It may be worth modeling those outside of Excel if the effort's not too high. You really just need to do an assessment there. And then finally, if they are highly repeatable, but they don't have too much business value either. Similarly, you probably have to make a bit of a judgment call around whether you go through and automate those. You might find that some things around compliance processes fall into this. So spreadsheets that you have to do because of regulatory requirements and so forth. So, if they're quite cumbersome to do, it may also make sense to automate those too. But obviously, everything that sort of fits in that top area are the ideal candidates. And if you do go through an exercise, I've just done an example here, based on the different types of reports that we see in organizations and different types of Excel-based models, and tried to plot them in quadrants. And this will obviously be different for everyone, but I think you'll find some of the repeatable activities around forecast models and budget models would typically fall into this category at the top. Monthly reports would. Here we've got dashboards and other models which have a high degree of business value. Any data sets which are essentially unclean, any ad hoc workings that you're doing, or maybe you're just looking at how you model a certain area of your business, and you really just want to do a mock-up or a prototype and make sure that's working well initially. That'd fall into this category too. You wouldn't go through the process of automating that because it's it's not something that has sort of reached that stage where it's repeatable and you're making different business decisions off it. And obviously this is a little bit subjective, things like emission reporting, obviously becoming more and more important. So, that can move up into that category perhaps as well. So that just gives you a guide of, where we would expect to see some of these items plotted, but it's different for everyone. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do was just talk through our 5 steps to automate. So really, this is a framework that you can use. Obviously, the first step that you want to do is conduct a spreadsheet audit. So you want to actually look and see what the key spreadsheets are in your organization, and essentially just make a list of them. Obviously it's a temporary activity, so that would be something that would be ideal to just put that list in Excel, for example. Use the spreadsheet evaluation framework to assess business value versus repeatedly. So that was that tool that I just showed you before with the different quadrants, actually plotting them on there. Once you've done that, you want to just have a think about, what is the risk to the business if there were significant errors in these spreadsheets? Because we know that I think Forbes released something a few years back that said 9 out of 10 spreadsheets do have errors in them. Some of them may be significant, some of them may not be. But what is the actual risk to the business? And obviously you need to look at the complexity of the process and the risk of the errors too. Then in step number 4, you should look at what tools you have in the organization for getting insight into your business and establishing that trust in the data, as well as facilitating collaboration. So you might have reporting tools in the organization already. You might have a suitable, what we call our CPM platforms for budgeting, forecasting, and both financial and operational modeling. There might be something available that you can use for that as well. But yeah, really just understanding, what do you have in-house, what's there out and what are other clients using as well, or other companies using as well. And then based on that, you want to prioritize and effectively take action and start building out a roadmap, which will help lead to being able to automate some of these spreadsheets. And as part of this webinar, obviously, we're more than happy just to talk through this process and sort of help with your roadmaps. And by all means, reach out to us. I've included Steve's email address here, who's the key contact. If you did want to do a no obligation consult around some sort of roadmap, which kind of leverages this framework as well. And we'll send through the details afterwards as well. But that's pretty much what we wanted to cover in this presentation. I know I've done a lot of talking, so I'll just hand back to the team for any questions that have come through.
It was an absolute pleasure. We'll look forward to being in touch with you soon.